What is the Kybalion?
The Kybalion is a book that was published in 1908 based on Egyptian traditions and documents, such as the Corpus Hermeticum and the Emerald Tablet. This 1908 book drew from this Egyptian material to present 7 laws, 7 principles that, in essence, serve to explain everything in life, from the smallest things, like an atom, to an entire solar system. 7 laws that govern the entire manifested universe. They are meant for you to apply in your own life to solve your problems, right? They're quite simple and very broad. The idea is to encourage people to take these principles into account as they live their lives, you know?
So, is the Hermes from the story related to Hermes?
Hermes Trismegistus, who is the great Kybalion.
This guy?
This man, if he actually existed, because many people say he didn't, that he was a mythical figure. It is said that he may have lived over a long period, from 2500 to 1500 before Christ. Right, he was a hierophant, an Egyptian priest. He possessed great wisdom, and in his school, he would share this knowledge only with his disciples, because he believed that knowledge in the wrong hands was dangerous. In other words, if a person did not have a strong moral foundation, having access to knowledge could be dangerous and might turn against humanity. It could be used for evil. Exactly. So, the schools were hermetically sealed, so to speak. Knowledge was only transmitted orally, from mouth to ear. The lips of understanding only open to the ears of wisdom. This is a Hermetic maxim.
Would a hierophant be a kind of mage, or more of a sage? What exactly would that be? What kind of knowledge did he work with? Was it knowledge of medicine, healing, astronomy? What exactly was that?
I can't say for certain the full extent of a hierophant's knowledge. He was like a priest.
Ah, I see.
A priest of the Egyptian religion, which was their way of life, their philosophy, the way they viewed existence. He knew a bit of everything, had a profound understanding of human nature, the mysteries of the universe, and some insight into the meaning of human life. It also seems that he possessed some healing power. Really? So he was a kind of sage, right?
So, Hermeticism would be, are these the collected teachings?
Exactly. Hermeticism is the body of knowledge attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, which has been passed down to us. Specifically, it is said to be the Corpus Hermeticum, which only became known at the beginning of the Christian era.
Oh, really?
The Emerald Tablet, which only became known around the 7th century.
Why was it discovered? This was...
Yes, they say that, because often knowledge is transmitted through oral tradition.
See.
Is written at a given time.
I understood.
So they say it was written there. Could it be, it may have already existed before, in oral tradition. Furthermore, the Minerva Mund, which is also another document, and the Egyptian Book of the Dead, are said to have their general guidance given by Hermes Trismegistus.
Yes, I've heard about this Book of the Dead. It is quite famous. They say it even contains techniques for bringing people back to life and so on. Isn't there something more mystical about it as well, or not?
Well, it's not quite like that. What happened was that when a person was about to die, a scribe, usually someone with a bit more means, wanted to make sure he wouldn't forget what would happen after death, so that he could handle it in the best way possible. So he would take the knowledge that Egypt had about death and write it down in a book in his own name. Oh, really? Oh, so and so, when you face the weighing of the heart of the deceased, say this to your heart. So, yes, the negative confession. It placed him as a character within the story of the afterlife.
There was that thing about weighing a feather and the heart and of the deceased. And it had to have the same weight. Is that it?
Actually, the idea was that the heart should weigh. It had to be lighter. It had to be lighter than the feather. Wow. In other words, everything he loves is not from the material realm, right? It's from the spiritual realm. Yes, so it was a book that was rewritten for each person. Right, isn't it? So, the so-called, what we have is a recension of various papyri of this type, right? The papyrus of Ani, the papyrus of Nu, which were scribes who requested that this book be written for them.
I see.
It was placed together with the mummy, on the chest, so that the person would have guidance on what to do in the afterlife.
And they also placed personal belongings as well, right?
They placed symbolic items, right? Jars were used to hold the entrails, the viscera of the deceased. Each of the canopic jars represented a particular world that the deceased had experienced. And, in short, these were objects that were symbolic and related to their life.
I see. Let's talk about those 7 laws, then, from the Kybalion. How could we begin this so that people can understand? How would you prefer to start?
Well, basically, the 7 laws begin with mentalism.
All right.
Mentalism is a law that is said to encompass all the others. It states that the universe is mental, right? The universe, everything that exists, originated from the mind into the concrete world, both from the divine mind and the human mind. So, if you imagine, for example, a table like this one, the carpenter first had to think of it before building it. Things do not come from nothing. First, it must be conceived in thought before it can exist in the physical realm. It is said that the manifested universe is also entirely like this. It first exists in the divine mind before it comes into manifestation, right? So, when you want your future to be different from what it is now, when you wish to transform your life, you first need to consider changing your mental conceptions, your thoughts, because what you sow today is what you will live tomorrow.
If I think good things, I will have good things. If I think bad things, exactly.
Yes, as the Christian tradition says, right, sowing is free, but the harvest is mandatory.
And
the sowing always takes place on the mental plane. This is the principle of mentalism. It speaks about how we deal with our ideas, with our thoughts, with responsibility.
the second
is the principle of correspondence, which says that what is above is also below. What is below is also above. In other words, if you consider a solar system and consider an atom, you notice that the similarity is very great, right?
It's about the macro and the micro. The
macro as the micro. True. That is, on various scales you have things that are very similar. Within us, for example, we have the physical world.
But at that time, they didn't have this understanding. How did they already have this knowledge if there were no microscopes, right? There was no way to see micro-life, was there?
Exactly. They probably had this conception through a kind of wisdom.
Yes.
Received through other means, not quite the way we understand it today in our high-tech world, right? Absolutely. They possessed this wisdom that the universe was all interconnected and that it repeated itself in patterns from the macro to the micro. So, for example, if you consider the way you treat your physical body, you can imagine what would happen to your body if you fed it anything at all, if you never kept it clean. Now, imagine that you do exactly the same with your mental plane. You feed it anything and never purify it, never remove all the elements that are polluting it. Imagine what that body would be like. It is more or less similar, what you do on the subtle level and what you do on the concrete level. I understand. In other words, there is a great deal of life wisdom to be drawn from each of these laws.
This mirroring of above and below, inside and outside, small and large, is that it?
Yes, exactly. Plato spoke of the microcosm and the macrocosm, right? You will see this in the Bible. God made man in his image and likeness, right? So, various traditions speak about this. True, the Hebrew Kabbalah, when it speaks of the name of God, Yahweh. When you write the name of God vertically, it forms the shape of the human body, head, torso, and limbs. So, several traditions speak of the same thing. The macro and the micro bear a resemblance in form, a similarity, a likeness in the organization of the evolutionary path.
I see. But how do we bring this into our lives, into our daily routine?
Yes, one of the things I mentioned to you is exactly this. Be mindful of the things we focus our thoughts on, because those will be the things we will see tomorrow. We are building our future in this very moment.
No, but this aspect of mirroring, how do we apply that? This understanding that, yes, above and below, inside and outside, does it have any?
A classic phrase that speaks to this is, "Man, know thyself and you will know the universe and the gods."
That
Phrase says that if you have deep self-knowledge, you can gain an understanding of how the universe is organized, because it follows the same organizational key.
Exactly. That makes sense. The third one.
The third is the principle of polarity, which states that similar and dissimilar are of the same nature, differing only in degree. If you take, for example, a thermometer, you will have temperatures. Right. Everything is temperature. One is hot, the other is cold. You can heat up the cold or cool down the hot. In other words, through an act of will, you can shift from one polarity to the other. So, for example, if you take a gradient of feelings, on one end you have hate and on the other end you have love. Through a process of will, of determination, I can interchange one for the other. I can transform love into hate and vice versa. Hate into love. Yes, through an act of will, because they belong to the same nature. I cannot transform heat into softness, for example. Those are different things. But within the parameter of temperature, I can interchange them. Within the parameter of feelings, I can interchange them. Within the parameters of thoughts, of actions. I am a person, for example, in relation to the physical plane, I am lazy. I can become an active person simply by an act of will, by polarizing to the other side of the thermometer and working on building that. I can reverse the poles in which I am identified. And
all of this here is condensed here.
This, in a very, right, in a way, an appropriate way, right?
I'm going to show this to my child. The fourth one.
The fourth is the principle of rhythm, which is the principle of the pendulum. Imagine that you have a pendulum here. You pull it to one side. When you let it go, the tendency is for it to swing to the other side at the same distance. Imagine that you pulled it this way, a distance x. When it swings to the other side, it also goes x. In other words, the oscillation to one side and the other is equivalent. This means, for example, if you experience an excess of euphoria, it is likely that the next day you will feel an excess of sadness that corresponds to it. Excesses are more or less balanced. So, if a person does not want their pendulum to swing to the opposite extreme the next day, they should seek a more serene, more balanced middle ground, because the extremes compensate each other. And within the concept of rhythm, he also speaks about neutralization. What is neutralization? How can you rise above the polarities of the world? I always use the example of children fighting over a toy. Right. One child fighting with another, both pulling on a teddy bear. When is it possible to neutralize this conflict? When you no longer desire the teddy bear. When you have overcome that need for the experience, you can step in and balance that conflict, right? You have risen a step from the perspective of consciousness.
That teddy bear, I don't need it, so I'm detached from it, able to resolve the situation and bring balance. If I were emotionally involved with that teddy bear, I wouldn't. It would be
re-fighting over the teddy bear. Exactly, and so it goes. Let's say this father starts arguing with the other father. These two fathers who are fighting to see who gets to educate the children. Yes, this establishes another conflict, but on a different level. Then the grandfather comes and says, "What is this? You are arguing for no reason, gentlemen. Both of you want what is best for the children." Exactly. In other words, it is a different level of consciousness. There is no longer a need for self-affirmation as the best father in the neighborhood. And so it goes. This grandfather might also argue with the other grandfather, and someone with a slightly higher level of consciousness can neutralize these conflicts. In other words, the more our consciousness rises and matures, the more we become capable of harmonizing the conflicts that are beneath us. Do you understand? So, if we see many conflicts in the world and do not feel capable of intervening in a positive way, it is because our consciousness has not yet transcended them. Right. If we had transcended them, we would have the ability to reconcile all the conflicts in the world.
Exactly. So, let's recap the four so far, shall we? The first is mentamenta, mentalism. Second,
Correspondence,
polarity,
polarity, rhythm,
and now,
then comes vibration.
Vibration
teaches that from the densest matter to the most subtle being you can imagine, everything in the universe vibrates. You see, for example, that we use quartz to make watches, right? Yes, quartz watches, because quartz vibrates. This vibration assists in the functioning of the watch's mechanism. So, everything in the universe, from the densest stone to the most subtle beings, they all vibrate, right? If you accelerate matter, you would have energy. If you accelerate it further, you would have light, and so on. They say that if you accelerate it even more, you reach spirit. If you accelerate even further, you reach God, right? It's all a matter of vibration, an acceleration of increasingly subtle vibrations. I understand. And so, in order to find your inner name, who you truly are, you would need to know in the presence of what you vibrate. In other words, in the presence of which actions, which words, which situations, something within you resonates. You feel as if your consciousness is in a kind of ecstasy, as if it is at its best. That which makes you vibrate is your inner name. It is the level of elevation of consciousness you have achieved.
The inner name is myself, the deepest part, it is. Yes, that's it.
The level of consciousness you have attained up to now, okay?
For example, my name, my current level, not what I can become.
Yes, your current level. Once you realize that you resonate in harmony with certain things, you can refine that. Learn to resonate in the presence of just acts of integrity, yes, acts of compassion. You can refine your vibration.
I understand.
Toward things that are a bit more humanistic.
Elevated.
And this is the process of human growth, right, which would be
Desirable. Retreat.
You can regress, although
more animalistic thing. Yes, either because of trauma or due to a situation of, I don't know, maybe depression.
Yes, although consciousness resists quite a bit to going backwards, right?
Consciousness resists.
Letting go achieved.
It's always
moving forward, yes, but if you insist a lot, you might succeed. Really, you might manage to regress. But the idea is that we should increasingly refine our vibrations more and more toward humanistic things, nobler and more elevated things, toward truly human thoughts and feelings. That would be human evolution, human growth, right? So, everything in the universe, according to the principle of vibration, is vibrating at different scales. And as you refine this vibration, you grow, you take your place within the universe.
But are you talking about a human life or about the history of humanity? The idea is also that.
It's the same even for non-human beings. Even for non-human beings, it is the same. That is, on the mineral plane, they say that depending on the vibration, of course, they're not talking about vibration in the same way we understand it today.
Right.
We can't compare it to the scientific notion of vibration, but they really speak of an identity of consciousness. In other words, even minerals would tend to develop increasingly complex structures, and this complexity would gradually raise their vibration. Plants, too, are constantly developing more complex structures. We could say, for example, angiosperms, or any kind of plant evolution. I see. We could look at animals as well. We could say that mammals have a much more complex structure, and for them, human beings are distinct from other animals, right? Humans would be a different kind of species, one that evolves when it attains values, virtue, and wisdom. Right? So, the entire universe would be accelerating its vibration to reach the ideal that is unique to each being, fulfilling what nature expects from each one. That is the idea.
But it's a counterpoint to entropy, which says the opposite, right? That everything moves toward chaos, toward the absence of order, right?
Entropy refers to the physical vehicle. Exactly. Which is a fact. But the idea, according to the Egyptian tradition, is that there are two axes.
Right, as
time passes, the physical body declines, but consciousness rises. I see. The ideal, at the highest point, would be a wise person whose body is greatly weakened by age, but whose consciousness has reached its fullest expansion. I understand. A consciousness of understanding life, of providing appropriate responses to life. In other words, consciousness is a compensating vector for physical entropy.
And so it is with the universe as well, constantly moving apart, becoming colder, and at the same time, there is an evolution of consciousness. Of the beings inhabiting it, right?
Exactly. The idea is that everything, in some way, is alive, possesses some degree of consciousness, and everything is in a process of evolution, including, for example, a planet, right?
There's that Gaia theory, right? Yes.
The Gaia theory speaks exactly about this.
Living entity, a living body. And it makes sense, sometimes, when you see that it reacts to what is done to it, right?
Yes.
There is an overpopulation of something. It
responds. It has a mechanism, right? A mechanism of balance, and when that balance is broken, there is a response, including global warming, as if the planet had a fever.
Really?
Like that?
Yeah, wow. I hadn't thought about it that way, but it is. When there's an overpopulation of something, it starts to react, like it's too much, and then
the balance is broken.
Exactly. And diseases and other things may arise to reduce that which is harming the planet as a whole. Sixth,
The sixth is the principle of causality, which states that every cause has a corresponding effect, right? So when we understand perfectly, nothing comes by chance. There is no randomness, there is causality. When we understand this mechanism well, which no one can escape, we can generate causes whose effects are consistent with what we hope for. Once again, a biblical phrase, sowing is free, but the harvest is mandatory. Do you remember this? In other words, whatever I want for my life tomorrow, I must plant something appropriate today for the harvest I wish to reap tomorrow. Many times, we do nothing in life and expect life to give us many things, that we will reap many fruits without having planted anything. In other words, we expect rabbits to come out of hats without ever having put the rabbit in there in the first place.
it seems the new generation problem.
Exactly.
This idea that the world owes you something, but you owe nothing to the world. You just want things, and you don't want to give back or offer anything first. Absolutely. Many times. This creates an imbalance, doesn't it? An imbalance of expectations and the whole matter of cause and effect.
Absolutely. It is a tremendous frustration because they expect the world to serve them on a silver platter, just as their parents did. And that does not happen. This generates a level of frustration and imbalance, often, which is one of the serious problems we see in today's youth.
Frustration can be managed to the extent that we do not expect too much. Do you agree? If we do not expect much, we will not be disappointed. But this can also lead to a very negative or even nihilistic mindset, like, oh, if I don't really want something to work out, and it doesn't, then I won't be disappointed. What is the danger in not thinking too much about positive outcomes to avoid disappointment, and at the same time, letting this lead us to inaction or to simply accept the bad things that happen to us without trying to fight back? I'm not sure if I made myself clear.
Yes, you were clear. You know that this excess of expectation is the main trigger for anxiety.
Exactly.
It is something we should strive to do, as Carl Jung used to say, body and mind together, here and now. That I draw all the fulfillment I seek from the present moment. That I am happy, that I am balanced here. That I give my best at every step. What comes next, we will see when it comes. But now, here, I am fulfilled by what I do. My
mind is here, focused on what I am doing, in our case, on this conversation.
Yes.
And what I am doing here will echo into my future, and everything will turn out. It will be good. If I am here thinking about what I will do 2 hours from now, I won't do this well, and things will go wrong 2 hours from now as well, right? 4.
Sure. If you want an ideal future, you need to have ideal presents to lead you there. Empty presents will not take you anywhere. So, this anxiety empties our present moment. Ideally, we should be giving our best, and the future should serve as a reference for direction, but not as an object of desire. I need to have my ideals so I know where I am heading, to check if I haven't lost my way, but not to be longing to already be there. I need to be here, body and mind together, giving my best at every moment.
10 place. The ancient traditions call this irretention. Retention is detached action. So you are present, living in the present moment, but you do not create expectations from that action. You do not have a desire arising from that action. So it is to consciously live the present moment without expecting a return from your action. This would be a form of liberation, wouldn't it?